In this tutorial, I'll show you how to replace the printer board on the Printrbot Simple Metal with the SKR v1.4. So I have this old Printrbot Simple Metal, and I had a failured printer board on it. So I thought, should I replace the printer, get a new Ender 3 or something like that, or should I try to fix it and save some money? And I decided I'd rather replace the board with this cheap SKR 1.4 than to trash Printrbot, because it's a really nice printer. And the only changes I made to the printer is that I've replaced the hotend with an E3D clone from China, and also a silicone type hotbed from China. That's basically all the changes I made to the printer from the original setup. So I bought the SKR from Big Tree Tech's site on AliExpress with their own TMC2208 UART drivers. So the setup I show is for the normal SKR 1.4, not the turbo one, but there are just small differences when using the turbo or the 2209 types of drivers. So you should easily look at the changes I made in my code, or changes I've done to the Marlin code, and figure out for yourself, based on other tutorials available on YouTube, how to do this on your own. So now I want to show you where the different original connectors should go on the SKR board. So starting off with a power connector that's been cut off and soldered, as I told you, that goes in here. So looking on the underside of the board, you see the plus terminal is there and the minus terminal is there. Moving on, the hot bed goes from this connector to this connector, and it doesn't matter for the printer board if you're using an original, non-original heat bed like I'm doing, because plus and minus could go in any direction. So here you see the plus terminal is on this side, minus here. Next, here you have the hotend, and the hotend should go from this connector to this connector. So on this connector I am using Chris's instructions for how to set up the fan for the hotend. So the fan for the hotend is here on the printer board, and that goes over here. And as you can see, the plus and minus are well marked off here underneath. So next thing would be the servos. On the printer board you have X, Y, Z and the extruder. On the SKR board you have the X here, second connector, Y, Z, and the Z could be 2 screw drives or only one, as it is for the printer board. That's why we're skipping one here. So we have X, Y, Z, and then the extruder goes here. Okay. More things to notice is for the TMC2208s, only have one remaining jumper
and that's the same under all of these servo drives. This is the only one that I have not connected because I have 5 of them. But as you can see, I only have one jumper installed on the 3rd row to the left. And that's the only modifications I need to do to use the TMC 2208s with the UART. So now all of the servo connections are put up. Next, we have the thermistors. So we have the thermistors here for the bed on this connection and for the hot end here, and those goes to the hot end is here, and the bed goes here. So let's see, what do we have left now? We have the X, Y and Z end stops, and this is, as I said earlier on, the biggest changes from what's shown in other instructions on this. So the X end stop should go in here, the Y should go in here like it says, but the Z should not go here because this connections has pull up and pull down resistors that we cannot use. So instead of that, we need to put 2 of the ends of the probe over to this connection, which is marked off with probe on the top there. So now everything is connected. I've also put on some power, and as you can see, when the SKR powers up, there's a red LED that's been lit here, and a yellow LED that's been lit here because of the SD card that is inserted. If I take out this card, I think it will go out. Yeah. So I will turn off the power again just so that the fan will go off. And I will tell you about all the connections. So I could start off it in the power end again. So you can see here the 12 volt goes in here and the ground goes here. For the hotbed, it doesn't matter which one goes on which side on this connector. Next is the hot end. Plus is here, the minus is here, and the fan, which is PID regulated, goes in here and here. I think I've okay. Moving on to the set probe. I'm taking this first because it's blocking some of the other connections. As you can see, I've connected the white one from the original Printrbot wire, which is the 12 volts to the probe. I connected this to a 12 volt plus connector here, and pulling this off, it says on the connector here on the, it says V in plus and minus. So this is 12 volts, this is ground, from the same 12 volts and ground that is on here. So you could actually connect this in here, but I decided to put it on this header instead. Okay. This, let me see, this yellow one here is actually connected to the ground on this probe connector. So that's the ground, which I'm using in this voltage divider that is in here. And this is the signal, which is 5 volt signal. And I had to change Marlin to be able to use the set probe in this setting, and I will show you later in the firmware. Okay, I will just pull this out and move them away. So, and here is the X and Y connected. As you can see, this middle one is the ground, and this one is the signal. Same goes here for the Y. So you just need to change the location of them and, you know, trim off the connector a little bit, and then it should fit snugly into the connector. Next, these thermistors for the hotend and the bed. Doesn't matter whichever orientation you use here. So the servos, I connected them here in this. Oops, I can take this away. In this setup. So the blue wire to the left, and then yellow, green, and red at last. And this is important if you want to use the exact same setup as I have done in my firmware. You could switch the direction for all the servos rather than switching the orientation of the connector. But if you want to use directly as I've done, you could put the blue wire on the left side, and then it will work nicely. I think that's about it, isn't it? Yes. So it's a quite simple setup. If you had like a LED screen, it should be connected to these connectors here, but I'm not using that. You could also, you know, have more fans than I'm using. Actually, I think I will just put the whole Printrbot on a laptop stand rather than connecting up any of the terminals here. So just to make things easy. What's there more to comment? Yeah, so when you want to flash this, it's quite easy. You could compile the firmware in VS Code. So you download the Marlin code to modify it, and then get the firmware.bin file, put it on to this card here, SD card, from the computer, insert it, and then power it on, or you could just reset it with this button here, and then it will boot, and it will flash the latest or the firmware, which is called the firmware bin file, on the SD card, and it will rename it to firmware.cur. So that's the latest one. Everything is explained very well in Chris's tutorial on the SKR 1.4 boards. So yeah. So compared to, I'm using the TMC 2208s rather than 2209s with the sensorless homing. So for these stepper drivers, I don't need to modify anything. They are like original. So let's see. This right here is the remaining SKR. Sorry, the remaining Big Tree Tech TMC 2208 that I got. As you can see, I've used you put on this heat sinks on the top, and yeah, it's really important that you orient this in the right direction. So the pot meter right there should go on the left side when it's oriented like this, as you can see, like this. So this pot meter here on the left side. What more? Yeah, as you can see, there are no connections. There are no pins underneath here compared to the 2209. So I don't need to do any modification, cut it off or anything like that. Just put it right in and it will work nicely. One thing I would like to mention, I found this adapter plates on Thingiverse, which is really great for the Printrbot. I will link to it. So the original board went in to these screws here, the screw holes here on the insides of the printer board, and when printing this adapter plate, you could just fit the SKR board under here directly, and it will fit nicely. I think it should. Actually, the heat sinks are sticking out a little bit, so I need to put it a little bit higher for it to avoid being in contact. But except for that, you see, you need to cut out a hole here in the frame in order to get USB access and access to the SD card. So I will do that later.
So I've done a comparison of the changes I made to the original code for Marlin, and I've used the WinMerge to look up the changes I made. So there are actually just actually 3 files that have been changed in Marlin from the original code, and this is in the Marlin folder for the Marlin 2.0, and I should start by opening up the configuration H, because that's where most of the changes are, and most of the changes are based on what Chris has done in his tutorial on the SKR 1.4 with the TMC 2209 drivers. Just change it to 2208, and where he had some more attachments to the board. So both these are changes for that. So let's get into it. So here I changed the author to me and changed the serial port to -1 according to Chris, baud rate to 115200, the motherboard to BDT SKR V1.4. This is a really important step. And set the filament diameter to 1.75. Let's move on. The temperature sensor for the hotend I put to 5, equal to Chris, because he is also using similar hotend, I think. And I replaced the bed temperature sensor to 75, and that is a 100K generic silicon heat pad with NTC thermistor. And then here I've set the PID settings for the hotend equal to what I've set up earlier on for the Printrbot. I also turned on the PID for the bed, and that's because I had that previously for the Printrbot, and I've used the former settings I had there, put it on. Well, both the PID settings for the hotend and the hotbed needs to be calibrated after these changes have been made and the firmware has been flashed to the board. Moving on, I set up the WiMAX plug, and that's because Printrbot has the end stop for the y-axis in the positive direction, so the WiMAX location rather than the YMin. So I changed that, and I also, sorry, that's later on, but the drivers have been changed to 2208 for X, Y, Z, and the E0, that's the extruder, and the other ones are untouched because they're not used. And here I've changed the default axis steps per unit, default max feed rate, default max acceleration, and these settings for the default acceleration, retract acceleration, and travel acceleration according to previous settings I had for the Printrbot. I set the Z axis as a fixed mounted probe. That's how you should set up an inductive probe. I set the nozzle to probe offset to 25, 0, and minus 0.2. If you have a different probe location or a different nozzle location, if you're using the original Printrbot hotend, it should be changed slightly, but you could use a ruler or something like that to get the nozzle to probe offsets correct. This one is just slightly changed. It's the probe speed, just to put it down slightly. And here I set the homing direction for the y-axis to positive, and because the end stop is in the positive direction. Put the bed size to 152 in X and Y, and set to 152 as well. And that is close to what the Printrbot is. Printrbot Simple Metal at least. And the YMin location is set to -2. I think I found this in a config file from a previous setup too. Here I set up 3-point bed leveling, and that's equal to the original setup. I put up set safe homing to let the probing be in the center of the board rather than on the sides. I made it possible to store settings with M500 and M501, and set the default temperature settings for PLA and ABS according to Chris's recommendations. And I defined SD support on the card that is on the SKR board, because I might want to put some files there. So let's get back to the changes made. This was the configuration H. Let's go on with the configuration advanced file. Those are in the root folder of the Marlin directory. So here there are only 5 changes. So I set the fan pin to 2.04. And if you look under the board, you should see that all the pins are marked off with different numbers. And this is the number and the location that Chris used this in his tutorial to get a PID control, I think, on the hotend fan. So I also put the fan in there for my Printrbot, and that's working nice. So I enabled baby stepping according to Chris's tutorials, and also turned on status monitoring and debugging for the stepper drivers. Also equally to what Chris done in his tutorial. So far I've made no big differences from what Chris done, but what puzzled me the most was the set probe, because when I put the set probe in the set end stop header on the board, I never got it to react when looking at M119 and seeing whether the end stop was triggered. So when looking on the internet, I will link to it in the description. I found that you need to change the location for the set probe. And the reason for this is because the X, Y, and Z end stop locations, the original locations, they have pull up or pull down resistors, which makes it difficult to connect the inductive original probe that is with the Printrbot. So the normally open 12 volt probe that comes with the Printrbot is not well suited for that location. So you need to change the location for the probe from the set end stop connection to the probe connection. And you also need to change one thing in the pins. So you see under source pins LPC 1768, under pins BTT SKR V1.4. So you need to change the original location, so the set stop location. If you look under the board, it's in location 17027, and if you look under the board, you see that the set in the probe location is on location 0.10. So you need to change this original location to this probe location. So the probe where there are no pull up or pull down resistors. So if you look at the schematics on GitHub for the SKR board, you should see that this input has no pull up or pull down resistors. So it's suitable for our type of sensor. So that's basically all the settings that needs to be done in order to successfully get the Printrbot up and running with Marlin 2.0 with the SKR version 1.4 and the TMC 2208 UART drivers. So I added the changes I made to this file to my GitHub. You could see here it's under Printrbot SKR v1.4 Marlin firmware under my GitHub, and you could see it's these three files I mentioned. It's configuration age, configuration advanced age, and this pins BTT SKR v1.4. You should be able to modify them directly under VS Code rather than copying this, but if you're lazy, you could just overwrite the current ones with these ones. If you're even more lazy, you could just download this firmware.bin, which is a compiled file. You should be able to just copy this onto the SD card, insert it into the SD slot, press the reset button or power off and power on the board, and when the board is started up, it should install the firmware and everything is good to go. So as you can see, it's quite easy to replace the original printer board on the Printrbot with a flashy new SKR v1.4 with 32 bits. So good luck to you, and thank you for watching.